Hi, my name is Joyce Slater, and I'm here today to tell you some stories. Fairy tales, fantasies, and myths. They're all alive and well, and they're all part of the summer reading program this year. I love fairy tales. I also love folk tales and fables, myths and legends. Fairy tales have a little bit of magic, and sometimes they have a king or a queen or a prince or a princess. They might even have a dragon. Folk tales are stories that are handed down from one generation to another to teach something. Myths usually have gods and goddesses in them and strange and wonderful deeds. Legends are about people. Tall tales are fantastic stories. There are ghost stories and scary stories. There are fables. You know Aesop. Aesop lived a long, long time ago, and we have been reading and telling those stories for over 2,500 years. So this summer, I want you to sit back and listen to some stories. My first story is a fairy tale because I love fairy tales. Once upon a time, there were many, many dragons in the world. But you know, they dwindled away because there were so many princesses that needed to be rescued from those dragons. And finally, there was only one dragon left. One dragon. Well, this dragon lived in Cornwall, in England. There were no more dragons in Germany or France or Italy or Russia, and there were never any dragons in America. But there was this one dragon left. What do you suppose a dragon looks like? A dragon has scales. How big do you think a dragon is? Well, is a dragon this big? Let's put up our hands. Is it this big? Is it this big? Oh my gosh, I think it's even bigger than that. Stretch your hands as wide as they can go. And that's how big that dragon was. He could breathe fire, and he had wings on his back. Now, in Cornwall, there was a king, and he had a daughter, and he thought his daughter was ready to get married. Now, she was only about 16, but he thought that she should be preparing for that. We must look for a prince, he said, and that one dragon, we must find him and prepare for your rescue. Well, the daughter said, "Oh, father, it's the only dragon left in the whole world. Why would we bother to slay the only dragon left in the world? What a waste! What a waste!" He said, "It's as it should be done. Your mother was rescued from a dragon, and so you shall be too." Well, months went by, even a year or two, and finally they settled on a prince. He came to the castle, and he was to stay, and then they would have this large, beautiful wedding. But one night, while he was there, the princess sent him a note and had him meet her outside. She said, "Do you know there is only one dragon left in the whole world, and you have to slay the dragon for me? I think that is just so sad." He said, "Well, that's as it should be. That's what your father has said, and I will do it for love of you." She said, "But you may die in the process." He said, "That is as it should be." She said, "I think we could tame the dragon. So let's try that." Well, the next day, of course, the whole village went to the rock near the dragon's cave, and they tied her to the rock, and then the prince was supposed to slay the dragon and save her, and all would be well. But they did that, and there she was, tied to the rock, and she said, "I really think we should try to tame this dragon." And then they heard the dragon in his cave. Why, he was rattling around. His tail was moving. Can you make your tail move? Remember how big that dragon was? And they could hear those scales clattering around. They could feel the warmth from his fire. They could hear him. She said, "Do you have anything with which we could tame the dragon?" He said, "Well, we should have food if we're going to try to tame the dragon. I did bring some biscuits." Now, in England, biscuits are really cookies. You know, like the cookies your mother makes, or maybe your father makes, or maybe you make. And so he brought out these biscuits, and he untied the princess. And the princess said, "Oh, dragon! Oh, dragon! Dragon! Would you like a biscuit?" "No." "Oh, dear, doesn't want a biscuit." "Dragon, they're very good biscuits." "No." She said, "Dragon, dear, don't you want a biscuit?" "No." And she thought she heard him crying. She said, "Dragon, what is wrong?" And he crept out of his cave, his long tail, his fire-breathing mouth, and he said, "You called me dear. I've never been called dear before. How sweet." She said, "We thought we could tame you." He said, "I'm already tame. I, I have always been tame." She said, "Well, then if you don't want a biscuit, what would you like?" He said, "Well, I would like to toast you and the prince at your wedding." "With what would you toast us?" And he said, "Well, the only thing that I like to drink besides water is petrol." Well, petrol is gasoline. Now the prince thought, I could go to my car and get some gasoline for him. And that's what he did. And when he left, why, the dragon was shedding great big dragon tears. He said, "No one has ever been so kind to me before. Everyone thinks that dragons want to eat princesses, but you know, I have heard that princesses don't even taste very good." Well, the princess said, "You will never eat a princess. You will have petrol and whatever you want." And when the prince came back, he gave him some petrol, and the fire came out. Oh, it was stunning. The prince and the princess got into the little car, and they drove away with the dragon following him, just like a great big puppy dog. They got to the castle and everybody was scared until they learned that the dragon was really quite tame. They prepared for the wedding, and the princess decided that she would have saddles made for that dragon so that the children could sit on his back. And then he could take off with his little wings and fly them around and around the castle. And that's what they did on the wedding day. And they did that until there was no more dragon. And they say they lived happily ever after. Is that right, my friend, the dragon? Here is my friend, the dragon. Oh, the poor thing. He hasn't really done any fire breathing in a long time. No, he's quite tame, just like that great big dragon of Cornwall. Thank you. Now you can go sit down again and rest yourself, okay? Yes. Well, what other stories shall we tell? Now, I'll tell you a folk tale that came from the Ozarks. Once upon a time, there was a little old man and a little old woman, and they lived down in the Ozarks, and they had a great big apple farm. Oh, the hills were covered with apple trees, and every year they would pick them. They would pick all the apples they could. Old Granny would peel those apples and they would put them in a great big pot. Can you circle your arms like a great big pot? And they would fill that with water and put it on a big fire outside. They would boil up those apples and make applesauce. Everybody around loved their applesauce. They would come from miles and miles around. But there was a creature that lived in the Ozarks who loved the smell of apples cooking in a great big pot. Every time Granny would start to cook her applesauce, they would hear him coming through the hills. Boom, 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 boom. Can you make those footsteps with me? Boom, boom, boom. Yes. He was so big. It looked like he could almost touch the sky. He would reach down and take that little pot and slurp that applesauce right down. Let's all take that little pot and slurp it down. And then he would go back through the woods. Boom, 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 boom. Ooh, it made Granny so mad. She said, "That old Sally Bally, he keeps taking my applesauce. Now, I don't know, but I got to get rid of that Sally Bally." So Grandpa and Granny, they called their grandson Jack and said, "You need to come down here and visit us. We got to figure something out about this old Sally Bally down here keeps eating up my apples and my applesauce." So Jack came down and they sat around, they talked about it. And Jack said, "I got me an idea. I know what to do. I am going to make me a lasso. And with that lasso, I could catch that Sally Bally. Now he took the rope and he started practicing swinging it around and throwing it and catching things. He said, now how are we going to plan this? I know, we'll make us a big pot of that applesauce, Granny. And when it starts to smell, that Sally Bally will come, and then I will lasso him and tie him to a tree. That's what I'll do. Well, Granny, she wasn't sure that would work, but she agreed, and so did Grandpa. Well, Jack and Grandpa sat out there cooking up that applesauce, and Granny sat on the front porch. Now, that was her favorite place to sit, you know. She would rock back and forth there on her porch. Now, they had that applesauce just brewing up really good when they heard coming through the woods. Now, let's all do it again. Boom, 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 boom. When who should show up but the Sally Bally? Ooh, he was tall, he was big, and he was just about to reach down to get that little black pot when Jack got out that rope and he started swinging it around and around. Let's swing our rope around and around and around. And then he flung that rope and he caught the Sally Bally's thumb. Well, the Sally Bally looked at his thumb and he saw Jack just a-dangling there from that rope. He started swinging his thumb around, and Jack was going around and around and around until he flung him clean off of his thumb. And there was Jack over by a tree, and his scheme did not work. So he and Grandpa saw that the Sally Bally was coming after him. And they found that big black pot and they crawled up under it to hide. Well, the Sally Bally, he went this way and he went that way. And finally, he saw Granny sitting on the front porch. And he said, Granny, where are them men folk? I want to get 'em. She said, what? I can't hear you. Could you just come a little closer? He said, I said, where are them men folk? I want to get 'em. She said, could you come just a little bit closer? And he came really, really close. And you know, when he got really close to Granny, she grabbed her rocking chair and she threw it in his ear and she jumped in after it. And she sat down on that rocking chair and she started to rock. Why, it was driving that Sally Bally crazy. He started knocking his head this way and that way and this way and that way, and he turned it all around. He went around in a circle and he flung himself down on the ground. He hit himself on a rock. And that was the end of the Sally Bally. Now, Granny, she crawled out of his ear. She was a little gooey, I have to say. She crawled out of his ear and grabbed her rocking chair, getting ready to clean it off. And she ran over to that big old black pot and flipped it over. And there was Grandpa and Jack just a-huddling and a-shaking. And she said, looky here. And they saw that Sally Bally laying there on the ground. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. He was a goner. They said, what are we going to do with that Sally Bally? Jack said, I got an idea. Why don't we cover him up with dirt? Granny said, that's a good idea. You know what we could do, too? We could plant apple trees on him. And that's what they did. And you know, those trees started growing, and they made the best applesauce, those apples from those trees. Now, when people go down there, see Granny and Grandpa, they say those hills in the Ozarks all look alike. You can't tell which one is the Sally Valley and which one is an Ozark hill. And that was that. Well, another story that I like is from Japan, but it's really based on a fable. And some people tell this in another way. It's an old, old story that people have heard over and over again, and it does teach us a lesson, a moral. And here it is. Once upon a time, there was a family of rats. There were 3 of them. There was Mama Rat and Papa Rat and Baby Rat. Now, Baby Rat was the cutest little girl rat. She was so cute, and they were so proud. Now, they were a noble family of rats. They taught her everything she needed to know to be a noble rat. Why, she could jump from the highest curtain rod onto a bed. She could run faster than any other rat. Can you run with me like her? Yes. And she could gnaw through a wall quicker than any other rat around. She had the sharpest teeth. Now, when she started getting a little older, her daddy, the rat, said, I want her to marry a noble rat like ourselves. You know, I want her to marry a noble rat. And after many, many suitors came, he picked one out with a long mustache that nearly dragged the floor. He was a handsome rat. But the mother said, I want something much better for my daughter than a plain old rat with a mustache. I want to look to the stars for something much better for my daughter. He said, that is not the way it should be. She said, well, I have looked about in the sky, and you know what I saw? I saw the sun. The sun is very strong and powerful. His rays, oh my goodness, they heat up the earth. They make things grow. The sun is powerful and strong, and that's who I would like to marry our daughter. Well, Papa Rat did agree that the sun was strong, and the sun was powerful, and would probably make a good son-in-law. So they went to the sun. They took their daughter with them. They went to the sun. The sun was shining brightly. And they said, Sun, we have come with our daughter. You see our beautiful daughter, and we want you to marry her. The sun looked at them. He said, I am not the marrying kind, and I'm sorry, but you are mistaken. I am not the strongest or the most powerful. No, no, no. You see, there is one more powerful than I. And they said, who could that be? He said, well, it is the cloud. And just then a cloud floated across the sun's face. And when it did, it blocked the rays. The mother said, "You are right. Why, the cloud is stronger and more powerful than the sun. Oh, cloud, cloud, will you marry our daughter?" The cloud looked at him and said, No, I don't want to marry. No, I don't want to marry. And you're mistaken again. I am not the strongest or more powerful, or most powerful in the sky. Why, the wind is the most powerful. Now let's all put our lips together and blow like the wind. The wind came and blew that cloud away. "Oh, Mother Rat said, I can see. Yes, the wind is much more powerful than a cloud, or even the sun. Oh, wind, wind, we have decided that you will marry our daughter." And the wind said, "Oh, no, 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 I will not marry anybody. No, no, no. Why would you want me?" He said, "Well, you are so powerful." And he said, "I think you are mistaken. There is one powerful than I am. That is that wall over there. You see that wall that surrounds that castle? That wall is more powerful than I, for no matter how much I blow, and let's all blow, I cannot blow that wall down." Well, the mother said, "Oh, you're so right. I think we'll go to the wall." And so all three rats went to the wall. And when the daughter saw that wall, she looked at her mother and she said, "You know, I have not said a single word, mother or father, but I do not want to marry a wall." Well, the wall hadn't even been asked yet. The mother said, "Oh, but you must. Wall, will you marry our daughter?" And he said, "Oh, that would be very nice." She said, "Mother, I just said I will not marry a wall." The mother said, "You are the strongest and the most powerful. We have heard from the wind that you are strong and powerful." Wall. He said, "Well, the wind is mistaken. There is one that is more powerful than I. It is that rat down there. You can hear it gnawing at the bottom of the wall, and eventually that rat will gnaw a hole right through it. That rat is more powerful than I." The father rat beamed because he knew he had been right all along. And the mother rat, right then and there, she decided that that rat with the long mustache that dragged the ground was the perfect husband for her daughter. And by then, the daughter, yes, she liked that rat as well. And they were married. And they all learned that it is best to be just what you are. Thank you. I don't know. Maybe we have one more short story. You know, there are myths. Now, like I said, a myth has a god and a goddess. And since my relatives are from Sweden, I like to tell myths from Scandinavia. This one is about Thor. Now, you know, Thor had a great big hammer. And that great big hammer, let's all put that hammer in our hands, that great big hammer, it was to protect all the gods and goddesses from the giants. But one day, that hammer disappeared and he couldn't find it anywhere. He was looking everywhere, throwing things left and right, when Freya said, "You must find your hammer." And about that time, Loki came along and said, "I know exactly where your hammer is. I was flying over giant land, and Thrym has your hammer. He's buried it beneath the earth, and he will trade you something for the hammer." He said he would trade Freya. Well, Freya said, "I'm already married to Odin. I will not marry a giant." Thor said, "Yes, you will." But they all decided that no, Freya did not have to marry a giant. They would dress Thor up in a wedding dress and send him to marry the giant Thrym. Loki would go as his maid of honor. Now, Thor and Loki were pretty big themselves, but the giant had never really seen a really beautiful woman, so they figured he would never know if they put veils over everybody's faces. And that's what they did. And they went to visit Thrym, and there was a ceremony. And just before they were married, Loki said, "Just one moment, don't we get a hammer in exchange?" And he went deep into the earth, pulled up that hammer, and laid it between them. And just then, Thor threw back his veil, grabbed that hammer, and he and Loki took off. They fooled Thrym. In fact, that was the end of Thrym. And Thor and Loki lived to protect another day. Well, thank you everyone for listening to stories. I hope you continue listening and telling stories every day of your life, because stories are so good for us. They keep our imaginations alive and well. Thank you, and have a wonderful summer.